Daniel was an ordinary employee in a small town in rural America. One night, after working overtime, he was forced to go home late. Since there were no cabs available and public transportation was scarce, he decided to walk home. He lived in a nearby town, which required him to cross a long, dark, and notoriously eerie road known as the Road of Darkness. As Daniel walked along the road, he noticed the streetlights were sparse, and the few that were there flickered as if they had electrical issues. The air was cold, carrying an inexplicable sense of dread. As the night grew deeper, he heard every step he took echoing in the silent surroundings. The crunch of gravel under his shoes became a rhythmic reminder of his isolation. There were no people around, and the silence was deafening. Not a single car or motorcycle passed by. Stories of supernatural occurrences along that road crept into Daniel's mind. Ghosts appearing to travelers and voices speaking from the darkness. He dismissed them, thinking they were just tales to scare people. However, as he approached an old tree by the roadside, he noticed a strange shadow moving beside him. His heart started to race. Despite his fear, he decided to quicken his pace. But the shadow seemed to follow him. He could feel a cold presence behind him. He took a deep breath and tried to ignore it, but as time passed, the cold air seemed to tighten around him, as if eyes were watching him from the darkness. Suddenly, he heard a voice, a cold and deep whisper saying, "Daniel, you can't escape." Startled, he looked around but saw nothing. He forced himself not to run and tried to stay calm. But when he heard the whisper again, he couldn't help but run. As Daniel ran, he heard footsteps as if someone was chasing him. He reached a part of the road where the trees were denser and the surroundings were darker. This was where he felt real fear. Every step seemed to bring him closer to something unexplainable. In an instant, he tripped and fell on the road. He felt a cold hand grab his ankle. He screamed in terror and struggled to free himself. When he looked at his ankle, he saw nothing but felt the cold grip. He got up and continued running until he saw a small cabin on the side of the road. Hoping someone was inside, he knocked loudly, crying for help. An old woman opened the door. "What's happening, son?" she asked. "Someone's chasing me. I need help," Daniel replied, looking into the old woman's eyes. But her face suddenly changed, becoming pale and her eyes lifeless. "You can't escape," said the old woman, but her voice was no longer human. It was the voice of something from the underworld. Daniel screamed and ran away from the cabin, back to the road. Now he could hear many voices whispering his name, saying, "Come with us, Daniel." The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the cold touch of the wind and the shadows slowly enveloping him. When Daniel awoke, he found himself in a different place. He was lying on a rough, cold floor, surrounded by darkness. The air was thick, and he could smell damp earth and decay. As his eyes adjusted, he realized he was in a cave. The entrance was blocked by dense foliage, barely letting in any light. Panicking, Daniel stumbled to his feet. He called out, but his voice echoed back at him, mocking his desperation. He had no idea how he got there. The last thing he remembered was the shadows on the road. He started to walk, his hands feeling along the rough, damp walls of the cave, hoping to find an exit. After what felt like hours of wandering in the dark, he saw a faint light ahead. Encouraged, he quickened his pace. As he approached, he saw it was a small fire, surrounded by stone. There he found an old man, dressed in tattered clothes, sitting by the fire. "Help me," Daniel pleaded, his voice trembling. The old man looked up, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "What do you mean?" "I was just trying to get home," Daniel replied. "The road you took is cursed. It feeds on fear and despair," the old man explained. "Many have walked that path, but few have returned." Daniel's heart sank. "How do I get out of here?" The old man sighed. There is only one way out, but it comes at a price. You must confront the source of your fear. Before Daniel could ask more, the old man vanished, leaving him alone again. The fire dimmed, and the cave grew colder. Suddenly, the walls around him seemed to pulse, and he heard whispers growing louder, filling the space with an eerie cacophony. Determined to escape, Daniel pressed on. He followed the whispers, hoping they would lead him to an exit. The cave twisted and turned, leading him deeper into its belly. The whispers turned into cries and screams, echoing his own growing terror. Finally, he reached a large chamber. In the center stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. The air around it was freezing, and Daniel could feel the cold seeping into his bones. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaking. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "I am the fear that haunts this road. I am the despair that consumes those who walk it. I am your deepest nightmare." Daniel felt his strength leaving him, but he knew he had to confront this entity. "Why do you torment us?" "Because fear gives me power. Despair feeds my existence," the figure replied. Realizing he had no other choice, Daniel faced his fear. He remembered the old man's words and knew he had to confront it head-on. Summoning all his courage, he stepped forward. "I am not afraid of you," he declared. The figure roared in anger, but Daniel stood his ground. As he faced the entity, he felt a warmth growing inside him, pushing back the cold. The figure began to waver, its form flickering and shrinking. "You cannot defeat me," it screamed. But Daniel remained firm. "I am not afraid," he repeated, louder this time. With a final scream, the figure dissolved into the air, leaving Daniel alone in the chamber. The whispers ceased, and a calm silence enveloped him. The cave began to brighten, and Daniel saw a path leading upwards. The escape following the path, Daniel emerged from the cave into the cool night air. He found himself back on the road, but the darkness seemed less menacing now. The streetlights were still flickering, but they no longer filled him with dread. He walked quickly, the memories of his ordeal fresh in his mind. As he neared his neighborhood, he saw a group of people gathered by the road. They looked relieved to see him. "Daniel, where have you been?" one of them asked. "We've been looking for you all night." "It's a long story," Daniel replied, too exhausted to explain. He was taken home, and for days, he struggled to comprehend what had happened. The experience had changed him. He knew that the road of darkness still held many secrets, and that it would continue to claim victims. But he also knew that facing his fear had given him strength. From that day on, Daniel avoided the road at night. He warned others of the dangers, but many dismissed his story as a hallucination or a dream. Yet, the few who believed him never walked that path again. The truth revealed. Months passed, and Daniel couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still watching him. One evening, he decided to research the history of the Road of Darkness. He visited the local library and dug through old records and newspapers. What he found was chilling. The road was built over an ancient burial ground. Long before the town existed, it was a place where a tribe had performed rituals to appease dark spirits. When the town expanded, they paved over the land, angering the spirits. Since then, many had disappeared or had strange encounters on that road. Determined to find answers, Daniel returned to the road during the day. He followed it to an old abandoned church at the edge of the town. Inside, he found symbols and drawings that matched those he had seen in the library. In the center of the church was an altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. Daniel felt a sudden chill and heard whispers again. He knew he was not alone. Gathering his courage, he approached the altar and noticed a small, ancient book. As he opened it, the whispers grew louder. The book detailed how to appease the spirits and close the portal to the other world. The final confrontation. That night, Daniel returned to the road with the book. He performed the rituals as described, chanting the words and making the necessary offerings. The air grew colder, and shadows began to move around him. The entity from before reappeared, but this time it was weaker. "Why do you persist?" it hissed. "I'm ending this," Daniel said firmly. As he completed the ritual, the ground shook, and a bright light engulfed the area. The shadows screamed and were pulled into the light. The entity's form disintegrated, and the whispers ceased. A new dawn. When the light faded, Daniel found himself alone on the now calm and silent road. The oppressive feeling was gone, replaced by a serene stillness. The road of darkness had been cleansed,